Hey, everybody, this is Paul with the Curators Podcast. We are the Kennedy Curious, the Wide Awake. We are the non-programmable, and we believe that Bobby Kennedy is the most transformational political figure in a very long time. I will say in my lifetime, and exactly the remedy to what this country needs today. We've said this before, we'll continue to say it. We think that this is a very unique opportunity to embrace a third-party candidate to lead this nation out of the troubles that we've dug ourselves for over several decades. And to that end, I have with me a young gentleman today who I met on the trail for the campaign. Dillin, you are a state lead for the Kennedy campaign from the state of Rhode Island. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me, Paul.
Oh, yeah, no, it's great to have you here, Dillin. Just spend a moment, tell the audience a little bit about yourself. You're in your late 20s, and I know you've had some life experience and a little bit of tragedy in your life. So would you share a little bit with that, whatever you're comfortable?
Yeah, so I'm an investment analyst dealing with commercial kind of real estate transactions. Out of high school, out of college, I did an internship, and after the internship, I ended up at a prominent Fortune 500 company here in Rhode Island. And this is all during the 2020, the pandemic had just started, and we're working remote. Coming back, they wanted everybody to be vaccinated, and I tried filling out religious exemptions. They were denying it. So, long story short, I had to part ways with this company. Around the same time, I started hearing about Bobby, and I was also going through some things with my family. So my younger sister started to express psychosis symptoms, and shortly after that, my brother killed himself. Trigger warning, I should say, before that. But before he did that, he was also expressing psychosis warnings. And then shortly after that, my little brother, who's currently has childhood leukemia. So all of this is happening at the same time, and I'm trying to dig into, what is going on with my family, with our genetics. But with my brother's case, childhood leukemia, even the CDC, they report that 90 to 95% of them, childhood leukemia cases, are from environmental factors. It's not genetics in the way that people typically think it is. So with leukemia, it's just like if you know anybody.
That's a really important distinction.
Yeah,
that's a really important distinction. The genetic causes versus the environmental causes. And I'm not sure too many people understand that, but the environmental causes are handled a certain way. They should be handled a certain way. They require certain levels of study, treatments that, we have to understand what the long-term effects are. But we're not sure that those studies are being done properly. In fact, we're pretty sure that they're not being done properly, right? So I just wanted to make that distinction between genetic versus environmental causes. And by the way, Bobby Kennedy is mostly concerned with environmental causes, and we'll get into some of that, right? So,
yeah. Absolutely. Environmental causes has such a profound impact on every part of our life. And as we'll get into corporate capture, we'll see how that component is kind of ignored. So I was saying with, you have alcoholism, and there are genes that make you more susceptible to becoming an alcoholic. But if you're never introduced to alcohol, you won't become an alcoholic. So the same way there are certain genes that make you more susceptible to cancers, but if you're not introduced to environmental toxins, you won't have the cancers. So, I hear people, when I start bringing up, we should, take the toxins out of our food and our water. And I say, my grandfather smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day until they were 95. And, that's not what killed him. I'm like, well, he had genes that, he could filter out those toxins better than a lot of other people. But unfortunately, as we all know, cigarettes they kill people very fast sometimes. So relating that back to
Yes, yes.
cancers, yeah, there are genes. There's actually a famous one right now, the MTFHR gene, which affects how our gut processes heavy metals, pesticides, and preservatives. And people who have a broken MTFHR gene, their ability to process these things are severely diminished up to 50, 60, 80%. Some people it's completely turned off. And you'll see that as a child, they come as a baby. These chronic diseases affect them pretty hard.
So your family history and your experience growing up led you to an obvious apprehension about things like taking a vaccine or what might be causing some of these, leukemia and psychosis. Is it? And it's not to say that there is necessarily a direct correlation between, let's say, SSRIs and somebody taking their own life, but perhaps there's a contributory factor there, right? And I think there are so many stories like this around the country. We in the United States are well known to be the sickest nation in the industrialized world. It's not even close. We spend twice as much per capita on healthcare costs than any other country in the industrialized world. Twice as much, 20% of GDP goes toward healthcare spending, $4.3 trillion a year. That most of that money is spent chasing these diseases. And so when we look at some of these environmental factors, the toxins that get into the food supply, the water supply, the drugs that we take, the side effects of these drugs, the vaccines even, we don't know. This is one of the things Bobby talks about. He says, let's do the studies. Let's find out. Is there a causal factor between vaccines and some of these conditions that we're experiencing? The conspiracy is not making a connection or correlation between vaccine development, the gold rush of vaccines since the early 90s, and the chronic disease epidemic, because those two things are very directly correlated. Fact, full stop, right? But the issue is there a direct cause? And that's where the studies need to be done. And that's what Bobby is calling for. Because we're seeing, and I want you to talk about this because I'm going to share a screen in a moment that shows some of these factors that go into what we're talking about here. All of these things, when generations prior were smoking 4 packs of cigarettes a day, they were not, experiencing these factors. So even the tobacco itself was not as toxic as what we're experiencing today. This chart from the Kennedy Beacon shows many of these toxic, and here's your free pass from the Environmental Protection Agency right in the middle. And we're going to talk about the corporate capture, right? And then here we have, and this chart is staggering and alarming. It shows the average lifespan of an American with and without a college degree. And just since 2019, the average lifespan of an American without a college degree has plunged over 3 years, almost 4 years. Again, we're dying sooner. And I've heard some very well-known people refer to this as a form of genocide. Callie Means talked about it when he was talking last week at Nicole Shanahan's nomination. So there's a lot here that really needs to be discussed, probed, and finding the root causes of this, right? So you've had some experience with this. You're familiar with the gut brain connection. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So first with pesticides, and preservatives, what do? They're designed to kill the microbes and the bacteria that are, can eat at the food and spoil it, or if it's pesticides, can eat at the plants and hurt the plants. So their job is to kill anything that's living besides the plant. So one of the ways they did that was actually to create a genetically modified seed that would not die from the pesticides being applied to it. But we're eating this stuff at an alarming rate, sprayed over all of our food, unless you're eating organic.
And Dillin, they're doing that for profit because it costs them much, much less to harvest that product than if they had to spend the labor to do it the healthy way. Isn't that what's going on here?
Yeah, they're doing because these diseases that affect plants, they affect the profit margins. So then they started having people come in with backpacks on and spraying the pesticides. Then they found a cheaper way, which would be to just have a plane fly over the crop field and spray it onto the plants. But the problem was, how do we save the plants if the pesticides are going to kill the plants? So then they discovered glyphosate, which was by Monsanto, and they created genetically engineered seeds that the plant wouldn't die if you sprayed glyphosate over everything, including the plants. Everything else would die, but not the plants. So that was another way. So now they could fire those thousands of workers coming in with the backpacks, and they could just hire one plane. So it's all profit driven.
And of course, that reduces their costs and puts a lot of pressure on those farmers who want to grow their food organically. Many of those farmers are in nearby fields, and they're getting, even if they're committed to organic farming, they're still getting the residue either through the soil or through the air of that glyphosate being cast about by planes. And so even the concept of organically grown foods can come under a little bit of pressure, not through their own fault, but through the effects of this, I'm going to call it this demonic process that these companies are utilizing. And then, of course, Monsanto sells itself to a foreign company, Bayer, who's in the pharmaceutical business. So you create a problem, you create sickness, and then you have this what they might call the treatment for it, which is drugs, right? And so it's a very sinister scheme to me, and it's been going on for a long time, right? So how does that? You said the brain connection. I heard Bobby Kennedy talking about the blood-brain barrier and how a lot of times these toxins don't get measured in the blood, and the conclusion is that they are no longer in the body because they're not measured in the blood. But if they cross the blood-brain barrier, they actually are in the body. They get into the brain, and that's where you get some brain disorders, brain diseases that are also skyrocketing in our population today. Are you familiar with that stuff?
Yeah, so with the pesticides and preservatives, their job is to kill anything that's living. Our gut is just trillions and trillions of bacteria whose its job is to create a barrier between the food that you're eating and the blood. So it's a very delicate process where it can absorb nutrients and keep out toxins. And when you keep introducing these pesticide-laced foods and preservatives, it eats away and diminishes that lining over years. And eventually you start seeing things cross that gut barrier into the bloodstream and make ways to the brain. Glyphosate, the pesticides and preservatives are doing the same thing, entering the blood, ending up wherever in the body, and they're attacking the blood-brain barrier, which does a similar thing as the gut, which it's a bacteria, beneficial bacteria that are designed to keep out any toxins from entering the brain. Only let in the good, keep out the bad. But when you have these pesticides that diminish that barrier, now the bad things start coming in. And you'll see, especially with people with psychosis and schizophrenia, they're finding heavy metals, arsenic, forget the other ones, mercury, cross that blood-brain barrier, and they'll find it in autopsies that could have been a contributing factor to their chronic disease.
So their regulatory agencies are asleep at the wheel here. I mean, it seems like they've been heavily bought and paid for through lobby efforts to turn a blind eye and invoke policies that allow for this poisoning of the food supply and the poisoning of American citizens. And we know this because other countries around the world will not allow the very same ingredients that you and I are looking at on the store shelves from, let's say, Quaker Oats or Cheerios. You cannot buy these products the way we buy them here. They are required to go through a more rigorous process of ingredients. And so, you want to eat healthy, move to Italy, move to even Algeria, right? I mean, there's plenty of countries out there that just say, no, time out. We're not letting these companies come in and do damage to the health of our citizens. But here in this country, right, something went wrong. So I know you know a little bit about that too.
Right? Yeah, it's funny. Actually, on my Facebook, I just shared something. It was somebody put, I think it was a box of cereal sold in America and the same box of cereal sold in Europe. And they look at the ingredients, and in America, it's this long, the ingredients, and in Europe, it's 5 ingredients, and you could read everything, you could pronounce it. So how did it get that bad?
We did that on a podcast. We did that on a podcast recently. We showed the ingredients on a couple of different products, and it's alarming what the processed foods, right? The high fructose corn syrup, again, another big cost reducer for the company, right? And then, do we even have time? Do we have how many hours do we have to talk about fast food, right? And which I won't go near, and I won't let my family go near it either if I can help it. But even like restaurant food, Dillin, we don't know. Like, where are they sourcing their foods, right?
Yeah.
We'd like to think that we go out to a restaurant to eat dinner, or get a slice of pizza, and we'd like to think that this is healthy, that we can rely on this, and there's nutritional value there. But if the nutritional value is being compromised by these corruptible forces, which are interested in profit over health, then we basically trashed the concept of what we're here for, right? Which is, first and foremost, treat the individual as the customer, right? Not as the product, not as the subject to be taken advantage of. And that's where the role of government comes in. That's where the corporate capture comes in, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. I know there's a deep dive to be done there.
Oh yeah,
USDA,
deep dive to be done. All of the agencies. One that I'm pretty familiar with, and I think is a great example, is the USDA. So that was
tell us about it. Yeah,
regulatory company who's supposed to, make sure all of our food agencies are, providing healthy food to us. They're keeping the soils healthy. That was actually created by in the late 1800s by Lincoln, and over time, it had become corrupted. So today, you look at the heads of the USDA, you find the executives of all the companies that they're supposed to be regulating. So a good meme to put this in perspective, because I love memes, is there's a couple on a beach and they're looking out at the ocean, and I see a bunch of people swimming with sharks. And the guy says, well, this looks like a conflict of interest. And then he looks up at the lifeguard tower, and there's a shark. So the same thing's happening here. We have sharks regulating the sharks, where you have companies like Cargill, Tyson, Purdue, which are major behemoths, billion-dollar companies in America, who are what we believe is the American public, are being regulated by the government in a judicious way, but it turns out they bought out and they put their own lobbyists in charge of regulating them so they can come out with fair, business-friendly regulations that, instead of stopping them from hurting the people, increase profits. So that's what the
Exactly.
USDA.
Exactly.
It's
And
it's
with that payoff comes a nice job in the private sector once they rotate out of that government position, right? The regulators, you always find them back in the private sector. Maybe they're on a media talk show. Maybe they have a board seat waiting for them. They get hired by a consulting firm, and they're definitely not serving the people. Now, we know Bobby Kennedy has been dealing with this for a long time. He has brought lawsuits against Monsanto. He has fought, the polluters of the Hudson River. He started River Keepers. He's worked on behalf of, minority communities that have been adversely affected by environmental toxins, Indian tribes, etc. This has been his fight for decades, and I want to show the audience this. And I've shown this before. This is New York Magazine back in the 1990s showing him as the Kennedy who matters, because he was, and Time Magazine even called him hero of the planet in 2005. But something happened after that. Something happened which led to this article in New York Magazine last year, 2023, which painted Bobby in a very different way. And in reading both of those articles, what I discovered was that Bobby Kennedy hasn't changed one iota. What's happened is not only have the corporations captured the agencies, but they've captured the entire government system. So you now have media as a mouthpiece for whatever party is in power, and right now it's the Democrats. And if Bobby comes in and challenges the power structure, which is exactly what this country needs, somebody who can come in and work for the people, he's going to piss off a lot of people. And those people don't want their world rocked. They have their status quo to protect. They have their pockets to be lined. And how dare Bobby come in as a David fighting Goliath and get in their way, right?
So I think a lot of people who voted for Trump in 2016, they thought he was a political outsider. He wasn't a part of the swamp. Nobody really understands, how people become part of the swamp or what it is. But since, everybody hated him, they're like, let's throw a wrench in the engine. But Kennedy is the true political outsider, because what creates a swamp are these companies we're talking about who donate millions and millions of dollars to these political candidates to run for office so that they come out with business-friendly regulations for them. Kennedy has sued all of them. None of them are back again. So the swamp sponsors are right now really trying to get Kennedy out of the game. His campaign.
I looked on the donor list. I didn't see Tyson or Smithfield Foods or Monsanto. I didn't see any of those names there. Yeah.
I don't see Pfizer either.
And it's not just, you're right to bring up Trump. He was an outsider, but I grew up very close to Trump and followed him my whole career. And at the end of the day, to me, he lacks the character as a person to see through these challenges on behalf of the people to the end. He's going to do what's right for Trump, and that's the same can be said for Biden. That's why they censor Bobby. They don't want him challenging the narrative. But Bobby Kennedy comes to the table with true character, and I will be glad to have a debate with anyone on his character and the man that he is, so that when he says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. And he never talks badly about his opponents. He just talks about their policies. That's testament to his character. Unlike Trump, who, can't open his mouth without calling somebody names, right? It's just, it's who he is. And I reject that politic. I'm not a fan of that. I don't want my children to grow up in that world. I want them to grow up in a world where Bobby Kennedy's values are leading this nation. So yeah. And where can people find you?
So you can find me at Dillin@teamkennedy.com. You can email me there. You can also email Rhode Island at Team Kennedy. I get that. We're looking for volunteers and supporters for the Kennedy campaign in Rhode Island. So if you go to Kennedy24.com, sign up to support, volunteer, or even just sign up to when we come around for petition signatures to get Bobby on the ballot here. Just sign up to be able to give your signature. Ballot access starts for Rhode Island on June 26th. We have about 2 months before that happens. And I would love to get, we need 1,000 signatures in Rhode Island, but we're going to shoot for 1,600 just so that none of the signatures can be contested. It would be great if I had 1,600 plus people sign up ready to give their signature for Bobby.
Like New Hampshire did it in one day. You're going to do the same. And
I helped out with that petition drive. It was cold out there. It started to rain a little bit, and people would still take off their gloves. And regardless if they wanted to vote for Bobby, they understood that ballot access is democracy in action, and to give people the right to be able to vote for who they want to is more important than their.
Those who know that democracy is at risk will go out in the cold, in the rain. They did this in Utah as well, because it is worth fighting for. And people like you as a group, you emerge as this new generation of warriors that can turn this country around. We're heading right off a cliff. You're, by the way, Dillin, in case anyone's listening via podcast, it's Dillin.
Yes.
So Dillin, Dillin at teamkennedy.com. And I want to have you back, Dillin, because there's several things we didn't get to discuss today, including some of the financial elements of this. And, I want to harness your background in talking about the implications there, and maybe a little bit more about some of the solutions specifically to the challenges that we discussed here today. So
absolutely, I'd love to be back.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. Okay, so with that, God bless everyone, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.